Alcohol. That's right, alcohol. While its influence might be commonly known to give you a spur of confidence to go talk to the girl at the bar who doesn't want to be spoken to, it also has the ability to influence the history of mankind. Abraham Lincoln's bodyguard on the night of Lincoln's death famously left his post to go drink at the neighboring Star Saloon with Lincoln's footman and carriage driver. George Washington used alcohol to sway votes in his favor and was cited in having 144 gallons of various alcoholic beverages for his potential supporters. There are even theories that the inception of grain farming, which helped move away from hunting and gathering and allowed settlements to form, was not to produce bread, but actually beer instead. What I'm saying here is that the power of alcohol can create some crazy what ifs. But there is one historical moment that gets lost by the wayside because it wasn't deemed important or influential enough. And yes, you've never saw such a place. South of the border, a large tourist attraction along Interstate 95 at the border of North and South Carolina had humble beginnings in 1949 as a cinder block shack dubbed South of the Border Beer Depot. It was created by Alan Schaefer, a Jewish man and owner of Schaefer Distributing Company and wholesale supplier of Miller High Life. When Robinson County, North Carolina, which bordered South Carolina, prohibited the distribution of beers in stores and restaurants, Schaefer thought it an opportune time to open his beer depot in neighboring Dillon County, South Carolina. The 6-bar-stool beer depot didn't only attract locals from Robinson County, but northerners traveling south, and the stop became so successful that it eventually turned into the large complex we see today, although its heyday is long gone. When you think of roadside attractions, it's easy to imagine the golden years of Route 66, and probably this place. Ha! I got you, didn't I? You thought about it. That's right. Can't get anything by this old Yeti. These kinds of attractions predated what we think of as the modern road system that began to form with the Federal Aid Road Act in 1912, with Route 66 being the most notable road to be constructed from that act. For instance, Lucy the Elephant in Margate, New Jersey was constructed in 1881 and still stands today. I mean, look at that elephant. That's a big elephant. Lucy is considered to be the first roadside attraction and falls into my favorite category, which is making an animal or random object massive for no reason or a very odd piece of art. Don't know if that description made any sense, but it will in a minute. Just hold on a second. But first, Lucy took this concept a step further by operating as a functioning hotel. Look at these people walking into Lucy's foot in 1912 for context on how big she is. Now, for the examples, think Carhenge in Nebraska, the Jimmy Carter peanut statue in Georgia, or the world's tallest thermometer in California. This is just naming a few of the hundreds to thousands of these types of attractions that you should all go and enjoy yourselves. Other categories include quirky museums like Hole in the Rock in Utah, oddball hotels like Wigwam Motel in Arizona. Ha! I got you again, didn't I? You thought about those cozy cones. There are many other forms of these roadside attractions. If you can think about it, it probably exists somewhere. I got a little bit off the beaten path there, but I just get so excited about these places. Roadside attractions flourished in the early 1900s when traveling by roadway became more common. Just think about it. Imagine you leave your hometown to go somewhere you've only ever seen on a postcard, and along your journey you see a sign saying, "Come visit the world's largest peach." That would entice anyone from that time period. These attractions were a great way for individuals to share their creative side with wandering travelers, and make a little money on the side, of course, for themselves and the local economy. But with the passing of the Federal Highway Act in 1956, many of these roadside attractions were left to the wayside and attendance began to plummet. Many attractions were lost during this time period or were forced to change to become more relevant. And one of our most famous roadways, Route 66, eventually became decommissioned in 1985 after Interstate 40 was completed. Although most of these places took a hit during the 1950s and onward, south of the border was able to remain relevant with the aid of visibility and direct access to Interstate 95. After the success of the beer depot, Alan Schaefer expanded the site into a 10-seat grill in 1952 and renamed the establishment to South of the Border Grill. The success he had with the beer depot continued with the grill, which can be linked to the post-World War II travel boom, and in 1954 he constructed a 20-room motel and changed the name again to South of the Border, and it has remained that way ever since. although the grill and the hotel identity was not the kitschy or over-the-top play on Mexican stereotypes it is today. As the story goes, a salesman from Florida in need of money to get back home traded Schaefer souvenirs for gas, and by the time the salesman returned home 2 days later, Schaefer had sold every single souvenir. Timing and luck seemed to fall right into his favor, just as it did in the early 1950s, as money started flowing in from selling trinkets, t-shirts, mugs, and many other items. With his influx of cash, Schaefer expanded his operations, constructing a gas station and cocktail lounge. Along with your typical tourist trap souvenirs, south of the border sold sombreros and maracas, which began the Mexican theme, and to further establish this potential newfound niche, Schaefer took a business trip to Mexico looking for goods he could import and sell to his customers. On his journey, he met 2 locals and they acted as his tour guides on his quest to purchase goods. But to his surprise, the 2 men decided to travel back to the United States with Schaefer after reportedly begging to be brought to America. The 2 men worked at the hotel as bellboys, where visitors decided to name them Pedro and Pancho instead of, asking them their names or something crazy like that. The name Pancho was later dropped, and the 2 simply went by Pedro. Pedro would go on to become the mascot and appear all over south of the border, although I was unable to find any evidence if the mascot was based off the 2 men, but I tend to believe the name was just used and the likeness of the mascot was based on a stereotypical bandito. Which, look at him. It seems pretty obvious to me. Pedro would begin to populate the growing complex on merchandise, signage, small statues, and eventually a 104-foot tall neon statue that could be driven under by vehicles. Pedro would begin the trend of building other small statues, which most notably include a whale, a brontosaurus wearing a sombrero, and a very long Dutch hound painted the color of a hot dog. There are many other statues of various animals as well, of course, many Pedros. It is at this point the dates of construction for new attractions, restaurants, retail stores, or hotels become a little spotty. But in 1962, Schaefer began to sell fireworks, attempting to capitalize on the fact that they were banned in North Carolina, just as he did with alcohol with the Beer Depot 13 years prior. It was another success for south of the border, and according to modern-day employees, the days around 4th of July are the busiest. Although in 1962, the construction of I-95 was looming, and unlike most roadside attractions that were bypassed by interstates, south of the border had prime real estate. With the oncoming interstate, Schaefer knew he had to expand his advertising to entice travelers to get off the highway. If you've ever driven on I-95 past south of the border, you'll most likely recall billboards like this one, and this one, oh, and that one, as well as the one over there, this one as well, I can't believe I almost forgot that one, and so on and so on. There is speculation out there Schaefer influenced where I-95 was going to go in South Carolina, or at the very least knew where it was going to be constructed because he was able to purchase high-value billboard locations. But nonetheless, all these billboards were designed and created by Schaefer himself, and at its peak, there are more than 200 along I-95 and other highways from the Northeast to Florida, and people just had to find out what south of the border was all about. You have to remember, during this time, tourism to different countries wasn't what it was today, and there was an allure to experience other cultures, which at the time wasn't as easy as Googling Mexico, which is why places like south of the border or cultural exhibits at World's Fairs were so successful. But the silly advertising worked and business was booming in the 60s and 70s. So much so, celebrities like Joanne Crawford, Rita Hayworth, Burt Lahr, and boxer Joey Frazier are believed to have made a stop on their road trips. It was during this time period that the complex purchased more land and constructed a barbershop, a variety store, a post office, an outdoor go-kart track, a putt-putt course, a campground, a steakhouse the shape of a sombrero, and a Mexican restaurant the shape of a normal restaurant. Tell me how that makes sense. An amusing story from a former south of the border employee depicts a battle of wits between Schaefer and a neighboring commercial property. The 2 enemies began building a fence to block the view of each other's property, which got progressively larger and larger. Schaefer, fed up with the ordeal, purchased a shop in town and gave the space to his adjacent neighbor for free just so he could purchase his land. Yeah, that is the type of business mind Schaefer was. Many more things were constructed during this time period, too much to keep track of, but the near 200-foot tall observation tower that's top was shaped like a sombrero is easy to spot. It included an arcade at the bottom floor and a glass elevator to take you up to the top. The tower was not the only towering structure. There is a water tower as well with giant letters saying S.O.B. S.O.B. That stands for something else, doesn't it? What does that stand for? I'll have to think about that one. That's a puzzler right there. After the observation tower came Pedro Land, a small amusement park primarily marketed towards kids that included rides like a carousel, antique cars, a train, and a Ferris wheel, among other rides. During the peak of south of the border, it was the largest employer in Dillon County with over 600 to 700 employees. It became a place for local teens to take their dates, or strangely enough, for young couples to get married and honeymoon at, because up until 1990s, you could get married in South Carolina at the age of 14. With parental consent, of course, which if you ask me, just makes it sound a whole lot worse. But because of this, the hotel even has a honeymoon suite that you can stay in today. Although in the 1980s, south of the border began to develop controversy over its stereotypical representation of Mexico, and people began to deem Schaefer a racist, which according to his son Ryan Schaefer, hurt his dad pretty badly. Although Schaefer never considered himself a racist, mostly because he employed races of all kinds, nor discriminated against any color in any of his facilities, which was a rarity back in the mid-20th century, especially in the South. Schaefer was most famously quoted by saying, "Only if your money is green," when a group of black visitors asked whether they could come inside. There are even stories of the KKK following Schaefer around and conducting burnings at his house and at south of the border. One story even depicts Schaefer meeting the Klan outside with a rifle, telling them to get off his property. But the complaints persisted, and while the theme of south of the border never changed, the billboards did, and most were taken down or changed to become more culturally sensitive. This was not the last controversy that followed Schaefer. In 1981, he pled guilty to 1 count of voter fraud and 2 counts of mail fraud after attempting to buy votes in the 1980 county elections. For his crimes, he spent a year in jail, but that did not stop south of the border from expanding in the mid-80s. The hotel was renovated and expanded, creating a new hotel lobby, which was aptly named Pedro's Pleasure Dome, which included a pool and glass geodesic sphere roof. As time went on through the 80s and 90s, Schaefer's zany complex was past its golden years, but still successful. Tragedy struck the Schaefer family in 2001 when Alan Schaefer, the creator of South of the Border, passed away at the age of 87, and the business was left to his son Ryan. At the time of Alan's death, the Roadside attraction was a 350-acre complex that included 5 restaurants, 14 stores, 300 motel rooms, a campground, an indoor putt-putt course, 2 fireworks stores, and dozens of larger-than-life statues. With the complex past its heyday, it was a much different place than it was when Ryan worked at the Ice Cream Fiesta as a kid in the 80s. Although south of the border changed and molded to try to get visitors off the highway, with the most notable expansion to date, Reptile Lagoon, opening in 2010. Claiming to be the largest indoor reptile exhibit at the size of 15,000 square feet, and housing over 15 types of crocodiles and other reptilian creatures. In addition to Reptile Lagoon, a few buildings at the rear of the property were demolished to make way for SOBMX, a motocross training facility, although Ryan's changes couldn't keep south of the border from remaining desolate most days. As it stands in 2025, south of the border is an aging beast of Americana, with some of the colorful billboards left illegible and a parking lot full of empty spaces and cracks and crevices. If you take a ride down US 501 going south once exiting I-95, you'll first be welcomed by gas stations on either side, with the restaurant Taco Loco in between them, with the entrance to Camp Pedro being behind the gas station on the left. Attached to both gas stations is Pedro's Pantry, but only one contains Pedro's Mexican Shop West. Moving past Taco Loco on the left will be Pedro's Myrtle Beach Shop, which if you're unfamiliar, Myrtle Beach is a popular destination in South Carolina. Further into the complex, on the left, you'll see Polanco's Bar and Pedro's Pura Vida, which are some of the oldest existing buildings, and is where the giant Pedro statue is. On the other side of US 501 is Fort Pedro, an insanely large fireworks store, which is currently the biggest moneymaker. Past Fort Pedro, near the highway, is where one will find the Sombrero Tower, which has mixed reports on whether the glass elevator, which once garnered long lines, still works. Further away from the highway, next to the tower, is Pedro's Mexican Shop, which is where you'll find all your south of the border trinkets, and across the way is the south of the border Motor Inn, which still sports the geodesic sphere roof. Moving under the footbridge is where you'll find Reptiles Lagoon and Peddlers, the sombrero-shaped steakhouse, and everything south of Peddlers that is part of the complex has been left abandoned, which is a far cry from the offerings in 2001. Pedro's truck stop might be open, but I have my doubts. With modern roadside attractions like Buc-ee's, prioritizing a larger-than-life retail experience, good food, and a clean place to use the restroom, places like south of the border become less appealing, which has not been lost on Ryan Schaefer, although there are still some drifters who make south of the border a part of their tradition. Earlier this year, roughly 30 acres were put up for sale, which included the abandoned children's amusement park, Pedro Land, a motel building, the former casino, and abandoned convention buildings. It is the hope that Schaefer can bring in popular chains to modernize south of the border to potentially bring in new businesses. Only time will tell if this place will meet its death in the future, but one thing is for sure, you'll always be a wiener at south of the border. I urge you all to stop by south of the border if you get a chance, or any roadside attraction you may encounter. It probably has a rich history and it'll help support a dying element of classic Americana, because I think these places can be pretty cool. Maybe you thought that already, or maybe you think that now. Either way, I hope you all enjoyed this video's deep dive into the history of south of the border. I think this might become a series that highlights similar places, and I decided to start with south of the border because of how much I saw it growing up on my drive south to Disney World. Also, go check out jnberger's documentary on south of the border. It is full of interviews and great on-site footage. I'll link it down below for you to check out. But I guess with that being said, make sure to like, leave a comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.